When I first got out, I felt like I deserved everything I got. It wasn't until other people, other people that I met said, they can't do that, they're not allowed to do that to people, that I started to think maybe it was wrong what they did to me.
We were nameless, faceless, voiceless, defenceless, innocent kids. We'd not committed any crimes.
Those that were placed into residential institutions, including those that were taken from their families as forced child migrants, those that were taken from their families because of welfare or other concerns, or those that were taken as part of the stolen generation, there are very severe and additional impacts to those that have generally been abused as children. It can affect their social, physical, psychological and even spiritual well-being. And these matters can be impacted at different stages and in different ways throughout their life.
So when you're ready, just inviting you to settle into your space.
I've been on a healing journey for about 25 years now from all the effects of the abuse, from being in care, a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse and emotional abuse.
People attended St Mary's who were very distressed about the lack of commitment of the church to believe or do anything about historical child sexual abuse or sexual abuse of vulnerable adults. There were also other forms of abuse like physical abuse, emotional abuse, which are equally important. But when you add it all together, it was an amazing abuse of fiduciary care and abuse of power, because society entrusted to churches the care of the most vulnerable, and that was children.
I was instrumental in setting up the original Neocol Action Support Group, which in turn morphed into the Historical Abuse Network. And that actually came about at the Esther Centre.
We looked at setting up the Esther Trust, and then that became the Esther Centre, and the Historical Abuse Network, which represented many individuals who with small groups were advocating but came together.
Because it was a group of people that didn't know what they were doing, got together, everybody's yelling and screaming, and the only people was Karen Walsh. She was the sound of reason to all of us. And she got this group of people that didn't have a clue about advocating, lobbying or anything else. They just wanted to go in and yell and scream and, jump up and down. But Karen got us in there as a group. What we've managed to bring about is the Health Department and Department of Communities have entered into a reconciliation process with all the children who as state wards were wrongfully placed into the adult mental institutions.
I'd only want to do 2 or 3 hours or maybe 4 at the most a day on a weekend. Just to ease myself back into the work environment.
That's where a holistic response such as Lotus Place is useful, because we can support people to walk their advocacy journey, but also be there behind the scenes when the impact of that might be a little bit more difficult to live with. We can link people in with social support, so where they can spend time with their peers and debrief with their peers about that.
Lotus gets people up onto their feet, supports them to stay on their feet, but if they fall down, they're also there to do that process all over again. Matthews went with me as my advocate, and he's done a heap of research to things like the beatings, which is...
We wanted a royal commission. We didn't get that from the state government, but we did get the Ford inquiry. Lenine Ford headed that up. She went above and beyond the call of duty. It was Anna Bligh and Warren Pitt that provided redress for the Queensland victims of the institutional abuse.
I became involved with Lotus Place, seems like only yesterday, but it must be 2003-04, when the Senate was doing inquiries into people known as the Forgotten Australians. The people who have been fortunate enough to be part of Lotus Place have now found a place where they have company, where they have care. When they're in trouble, people can talk with them. And through some of the battles that people have, particularly in the legal system, around issues about redress and those things, Lotus Place provides very professional and personal support.
And
we're calling it an art workshop. So basically we're making art, but it's also a very social activity. It's as much about what we're talking about as it is about making the art.
Well, we're sisters, we're separated, and it was in 1984 that we got back together again. The moment she got out of the car on the driveway, I just ran down the stairs. I knew who she was because she looked like Mum.
God help me.
We're a statewide service, so we provide services to people right across the state of Queensland, regardless of where they're in care. Here in Brisbane we have a resource centre where people can drop in and spend time, and we also have smaller versions of that resource centre in Rockhampton and Townsville.
One of the crucial parts in my own healing journey with accessing Lotus Place was that they were able to access my historical records of my time while I was in care. And when I was going through a period in my healing journey, I had to find something around that you can identify with and that's symbolic or positive in your life, and I didn't have anything. I couldn't find anything. And he said, well, you'll have to find something. And it was when we accessed my records and I saw little snippets in those records said things like, Dennis has an amazing insight into his life. That just hit me in my heart, and I just felt so much self-esteem, which I'd never felt before about me as a person, as a human being.
Lotus Place provides an extraordinarily important part of the service system, and that is it's a safe place where people who are victims and survivors of sexual abuse can go and know that they will be respected and believed. But more important than that, it's a place where people understand the sorts of impacts and traumas that have affected their lives. And the other part of the Lotus Place that is very important is that they can advocate for the individuals that have come forward, help them navigate very complex health and social services system. And at the end of the day, while they can't give them back what they lost as a child, they can certainly enable people to not only survive, but thrive as adults.
We come to the park to celebrate Christmas. We started doing it a few years back because we really heard from people that they missed out on Christmas celebrations when they were kids in the orphanages, and it was a way of coming to the park and just having some fun.
Christmas time is a very special time for families, and even though we didn't have our families as children, we want our children, our children's children, our children's children's children to feel family.
Well done.
We've had a lot of impact on the way children are treated today and the things that are available to them, like transition from care. That came from the Historic Abuse Network recommendations and what we lobbied for. And so that's not my achievement, that's a whole group's achievement.
Well, the Commission's already made recommendations about opening access to counselling and psychological supports for people throughout their whole life so they can access it when they need it. But over and above that, we actually need more additional support services, particularly in relation to navigating other social service systems. For example, accessing housing, education, helping them with parenting skills, and access to redress and compensation arrangements. So the support needs for victims and survivors of child sexual abuse are multifaceted, they're complex in character, and they have to be available at different stages through people's life.
The Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Childhood Sexual Abuse is finishing, and that's a really big milestone in the lives of people who have given so much of their story and experiences to the Royal Commission. But that's not the end of it. It's now up to the Australian public, to the institutions who had to be accountable to the Commission, and to ensure that the law reform will go ahead, that it won't just be about child sexual abuse but about physical and psychological abuse as well. And they want security in knowing not only that there will be a redress scheme and it will be implemented with fairness and accountability, and that there will be services ongoing, and that aged care will be looked at as a significant issue for the ageing population.